Imagine a boy, barely 13, shrouded in darkness, armed with only a short blade, sent into the ancient Peloponnesian countryside, not to scout, not to fight a declared enemy, but to hunt. Under the cloak of night, his target was not an opposing soldier, but someone else entirely. Someone he was taught to see as less than human. This was the Krypteia, a system etched into the very fabric of Spartan society, a chilling ritual designed to maintain an unimaginable order. A secret so brutal, even ancient historians spoke of it in hushed tones, revealing only fragments of its true horror. Before we delve into the shadows of this ancient world, tell us in the comments below, from where in the world are you watching today? Now, let's peel back the layers of myth and confront the unsettling truth. For generations, the very name Sparta has resonated with an almost mythical quality, conjuring visions of unparalleled military prowess, unwavering discipline, and the profound self-sacrifice epitomized by the stand at Thermopylae. This idealized image, meticulously cultivated by the Spartans themselves, and subsequently amplified by historians and romanticized accounts, paints a picture of a society singular in its dedication to martial excellence, civic duty, and a unique form of aristocratic austerity. Yet, beneath this meticulously crafted facade of glory, woven into the very fabric of their society, lay a profoundly unsettling truth, a systemic brutality, largely concealed from casual observation, that fundamentally challenged the notion of their celebrated virtue. This dark underbelly was the Krypteia, an institution so deeply ingrained in Spartan statecraft that its existence marked a stark divergence from the Hellenic ideals of its time. The Krypteia was not a casual custom or an unofficial rite of passage. It was a formal, state-sanctioned program meticulously designed and executed, in which Spartan youths, often no older than 13 or 14 years of age, were thrust into a chilling role. Armed with only a short blade and cloaked in dark garments that allowed them to melt into the shadows of the rugged Peloponnesian landscape, these adolescents were dispatched into the countryside. Their mission was not to patrol borders, defend against foreign incursions, or engage in open, honorable combat. Instead, their designated targets were the Helots, the vast and perpetually subjugated population that formed the indispensable economic backbone of the entire Spartan state. These Helots were not merely chattel slaves in the conventional sense. They were, in essence, an enslaved nation. Primarily the descendants of conquered peoples, particularly the Messenians and various Laconian groups, stripped of their land, their freedom, and their cultural identity. They tilled the fertile fields, harvested the crops, managed the livestock, and performed the myriad labors that sustained the Spartan citizens, thereby freeing the latter to pursue their relentless military training and civic responsibilities. This immense workforce, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, represented a demographic reality that profoundly shaped Spartan policy. For every full Spartan citizen, there existed an estimated 7 to 10 Helots, a staggering numerical imbalance that underscored the precarious position of the ruling class. This demographic disparity created an atmosphere of pervasive and existential fear within Sparta. The Spartan minority lived in constant apprehension of a large-scale Helot uprising, a rebellion that, given their overwhelming numbers, possessed the potential to utterly dismantle the Spartan state. Historical precedent intensified this fear. The Third Messenian War, triggered by a catastrophic earthquake in 464 BCE, saw the Helots seize the opportunity to revolt, pushing Sparta to the brink of collapse and requiring significant external aid to suppress. This historical trauma cemented in the Spartan psyche the belief that the Helots represented an ever-present internal threat, perpetually on the verge of eruption. The Spartan solution to this profound vulnerability was not integration, amelioration of living conditions, or any attempt at social engineering that might foster loyalty. Instead, their strategy was one of calculated, systematic terror, designed to keep the Helot population fragmented, demoralized, and incapable of organized resistance. The Krypteia emerged as a critical instrument of this terror. Ancient historians, though separated by centuries from the height of Spartan power, provide crucial, albeit often disturbing, insights into the Krypteia. Plutarch, writing in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, compiled his parallel lives, drawing upon earlier, now lost sources, which allowed him to describe the Krypteia with a discernible blend of historical fascination and veiled horror. He detailed how Spartan magistrates periodically sent out into the country at large the most discreet of the young men, who were furnished merely with daggers and such provisions as were necessary. In the daytime, they hid themselves in out-of-the-way places, but in the night they came down into the roads and killed those helots whom they caught. Plutarch's account, while not providing every specific operational detail, clearly establishes the deliberate, clandestine, and lethal nature of these expeditions. His narrative subtly underscores the moral ambiguity of a society that could produce heroes like Leonidas while simultaneously orchestrating such cold-blooded acts. Thucydides, living much closer to the classical Spartan era in the 5th century BCE, adopted a more clinical and analytical tone. While he did not explicitly detail the Krypteia as a specific program, his writings frequently addressed the Helots and the underlying Spartan fear. He spoke of the greatest number of their institutions being always to guard against them. Thucydides' most chilling passage, often cited in discussions of Spartan brutality, recounts an incident around 424 BCE. The Spartan ephors, the highest-ranking magistrates, announced that any Helot who claimed to have fought bravely for Sparta would be granted freedom. 2,000 men stepped forward, full of hope. They were garlanded, celebrated, and paraded through the temples, only to vanish without a trace. Thucydides reported with stark detachment, "No one ever knew how each of them perished." While this atrocity was not explicitly labeled a Krypteia operation, it profoundly illuminates the psychological landscape and strategic mindset that gave rise to institutions like the Krypteia. It demonstrates the Spartan willingness to use systematic disappearance and mass murder as a tool for population control, targeting those who possessed the courage and leadership potential to inspire revolt. These historical accounts, despite their differing narrative styles and temporal distances, converge on a singular, undeniable premise. The Krypteia was not an isolated incident of brutality, an unofficial military secret, or a mere training exercise that occasionally went awry. It was instead a deliberate and institutionalized state policy, a core component of Spartan governance, deeply rooted in their overwhelming fear of the enslaved population and an unyielding determination to maintain absolute domination. It operated not as a secret from the Helots, who were undoubtedly aware of the disappearances and the omnipresent danger, but as a carefully managed, clandestine operation, whose internal mechanisms and full scope were kept from the wider Greek world and later historians. This policy, though abhorrent to modern sensibilities, was deemed essential by the Spartans to sustain their unique social order, to suppress dissent, and to ensure that the massive Helot workforce remained productive and, critically, entirely subjugated. The Krypteia was the insidious shadow cast by the celebrated light of Spartan glory, a testament to the profound cost of their perceived martial greatness. The brutal crucible of the Spartan agage was where the foundation for the Krypteia was laid, a system designed to systematically strip away individuality and forge compliant, ruthless instruments of the state. From the tender age of 7, Spartan boys were wrenched from the relative comfort and familiarity of their families, abruptly severed from maternal influence, and plunged into communal barracks. There, they entered a world defined by privation, relentless physical discipline, and a constant, often brutal competition among their peers. This was not merely military training. It was a comprehensive program of psychological and physical conditioning intended to cultivate absolute obedience, cunning, and an almost instinctual capacity for survival under harsh conditions. Their days were a relentless cycle of physical exercises, mock battles, and instruction in rudimentary literacy, though academic pursuits were secondary to martial development. They were deliberately underfed, compelled to steal food to satiate their hunger, not out of malice, but as a deliberate training exercise in stealth, resourcefulness, and deception. To be caught stealing resulted not in sympathy, but in severe beatings, not for the act of theft itself, but for the failure to execute it successfully. This environment fostered a profound appreciation for cunning and secrecy. They learned to endure pain without complaint, to speak sparingly in laconic phrases, and to prioritize the collective over any individual sentiment. Ritualized beatings, such as the infamous diamastigosis at the altar of Artemis Orthia, pushed their endurance to its absolute limits, desensitizing them to suffering, both their own and that of others. They were taught to fight fiercely, to kill efficiently, and to view weakness, either in themselves or others, as a grave defect. As these boys matured through the various stages of the agoge, progressing from paides to ephebes, the training intensified, preparing them for the ultimate test of their conditioning. The true initiation, however, arrived between the ages of 13 and 14. At this critical juncture, a select group of adolescents was identified. These were not simply the strongest or most physically capable, though those attributes were certainly valued. The chosen few were those who displayed a particular blend of cunning, unwavering resolve, and, crucially, a nascent ruthlessness. The boys deemed most promising, most strong, and most cruel. They were the ones who had shown the most aptitude for stealth, the least compunction in inflicting pain, and the greatest capacity for cold, calculated action. These were the candidates for the Krypteia. The transition was marked by a chilling simplicity. Each chosen youth was provided with a short, serviceable iron knife, its edge honed to a lethal sharpness, and a dark, unassuming cloak designed for concealment rather than warmth. With these meager provisions, they were sent out into the vast, unforgiving Laconian countryside, dispatched to distant ravines, dense forests, and remote, desolate areas. The orders they received were clear, concise, and absolutely perturbing in their implications. During the daylight hours, they were to remain hidden, utterly invisible, camouflaged against the rugged terrain, enduring hunger and exposure, practicing the art of silent observation and concealment. Their existence was to be a phantom's, leaving no trace, making no sound. As dusk deepened into the impenetrable blackness of the Peloponnesian night, these young predators would emerge from their hiding places. Their mission was grim: to hunt. Their targets were specifically designated: solitary helots, particularly those who exhibited signs of strength, intelligence, or leadership potential. A sturdy build, a confident bearing, a reputation for wisdom, or a history of inspiring others, any of these traits could mark a helot for elimination. The rationale was brutally pragmatic. By systematically removing potential leaders, the Spartans aimed to decapitate any nascent resistance before it could coalesce. The goal was to instill an atomizing terror, forcing helots to mistrust even their own neighbors, to fear venturing out alone, and to suppress any outward display of competence that might draw the attention of these unseen hunters. This was not framed as combat. It was, in its starkest reality, cold-blooded assassination. There was no pretense of a fair fight, no clash of arms on an open field. These were ambushes in the dark, carried out with a brutal efficiency honed by years of the agoge. Knives would find flesh in unlit alleys, along deserted roads, or in the isolated paths leading to distant farms. Throats were slit silently, backs were stabbed without warning. The victims were often caught unaware, their lives extinguished with swift, brutal finality. After the deed, the bodies were deliberately left behind, not always hidden, but sometimes strategically placed, grim, silent warnings to the surviving helots. Each corpse served as a chilling testament to the unseen hand of Spartan power, a stark reminder that nowhere was safe, and no one was beyond the reach of their secret enforcers. The psychological impact on the helot population was profound and lasting, an omnipresent dread, a pervasive sense of vulnerability, and an enforced resignation to their fate. The calculated cruelty that underpinned the Krypteia was further illuminated by historical events of even greater scale and horror. Thucydides, with his characteristic factual austerity, provided one of the most chilling accounts of Spartan ruthlessness, an event that, while not explicitly part of the Krypteia's direct operations, perfectly encapsulated the mindset it fostered and served. Around 424 BCE, during a period of heightened tensions and concern over helot loyalty, the Spartan ephors orchestrated a public spectacle. They announced a unique opportunity. Any helot who believed they had distinguished themselves in service to Sparta, particularly in military campaigns, and thus deserved freedom, should step forward. It was a beacon of hope in a life of unending servitude. 2,000 helot men, undoubtedly buoyed by the prospect of liberation, dignity, and a future free from the lash and the yoke, presented themselves. One can only imagine the desperate hope that must have filled their hearts, the dreams of a life unburdened by fear and oppression.
Elaborate ceremonies were reportedly held. These chosen helots were led to the hallowed temples, crowned with ceremonial garlands, symbols of honor and impending freedom, and publicly celebrated, paraded before the Spartan citizens as exemplars of loyalty. And then, with an almost unimaginable precision, every single one of those 2,000 men systematically disappeared. Thucydides, writing with a stark, almost clinical detachment that resonates through the millennia, delivered the chilling punchline. No one ever knew how each of them perished. This mass disappearance, a meticulously planned act of state terrorism, was a profound demonstration of the cold, calculating cruelty that the Krypteia was designed to embed within the psyche of the Spartan ruling class and to project onto the helot population. It was not merely about eliminating potential threats. It was about crushing hope, dismantling trust, and demonstrating the absolute, unchallengeable power of the Spartan state. The Krypteia taught individual Spartans to kill with impunity, while events like the 2,000 disappearances illustrated the collective capacity of the Spartan leadership for systematic, large-scale atrocity. Together, they formed a comprehensive strategy of social control, a ritual of blood that ensured the continued subjugation of a vast, unwilling population, maintaining the delicate balance of power through an unyielding reign of terror. It was a stark reminder that the glory of Sparta was built upon a foundation steeped in fear and unpunished murder. The perversity of the Spartan system extended far beyond the clandestine operations of the Krypteia, infiltrating the very legal and religious fabric of the state to normalize and even sanctify the brutal subjugation of the helots. This systematic dehumanization, far from being a hidden shame, was an explicit, almost ritualistic component of Spartan governance. The Krypteia, while covert in its execution, did not operate in absolute secrecy. Its existence and the omnipresent threat it represented was a known and terrifying reality for the helot population. This awareness was reinforced by a legal declaration that stands as one of the most chilling acts of state-sanctioned violence in antiquity. Every autumn, with the changing of seasons, a pivotal ritual unfolded in Sparta. As the newly elected ephors, the 5 powerful magistrates who served as the executive branch of the Spartan government, assumed their office, one of their very first acts was not a pronouncement of policy or a declaration of war against a foreign adversary. Instead, they formally and publicly declared war on the helots. This was not a metaphorical declaration, nor was it intended to initiate conventional military campaigns with pitched battles and sieges. It was a profoundly cynical, legalistic maneuver designed to nullify any ethical or religious qualms associated with the killing of helots.
In ancient Greek society, the taking of human life, particularly outside the context of formal warfare, carried significant religious and social implications. It was believed to incur miasma, a spiritual pollution or defilement that required elaborate purification rituals and could bring divine displeasure upon the community. However, by formally declaring a perpetual state of war against the helots, the ephors effectively circumvented these constraints. This declaration legally reclassified every helot as an enemy combatant, thus making their killing not merely permissible but religiously clean. In the eyes of Spartan law and religion, to kill a helot during this declared state of war carried no spiritual stain, no miasma, no requirement for purification. The stark contrast was clear. Killing another Spartan, even accidentally, might bring profound spiritual pollution, demanding rites of cleansing. Killing a helot, however, especially during the period of Krypteia, was an act devoid of such consequences. It was, in essence, a license to kill, issued annually and validated by the gods themselves. The psychological impact of this annual declaration on the young Spartan men involved in the Krypteia cannot be overstated. From a tender age, through the rigorous conditioning of the agoge, they were taught to view helots as an inferior, dangerous, and almost subhuman class. The formal declaration of war solidified this indoctrination, providing a powerful legal and religious justification for the violence they were expected to commit. They were not merely learning to kill, they were learning to systematically dehumanize. They were conditioned to perceive an entire population group as legitimate targets for lethal violence, not in the honorable open battlefields their society glorified, but in cowardly ambushes and cold-blooded assassinations under the cloak of night. This deliberate process undermined any notion of conventional warrior honor that Sparta so vehemently proclaimed for itself. True Spartan warriors were celebrated for confronting their enemies face to face, for their courage in formation, and for dying gloriously in defense of their city. The Krypteia, however, demanded the opposite: stealth, surprise, and the brutal efficiency of an executioner against an unarmed or unsuspecting victim. It taught them that power did not require justification in the face of the enemy, that violence was the ultimate arbiter, and that certain lives simply did not possess the same inherent worth as their own. This foundational lesson, absorbed during their formative years, would indelibly shape their worldview as they transitioned into full citizenship. The insights of ancient philosophers further corroborate this deeply ingrained fear and the resulting brutality. Aristotle, known for his incisive political analysis, keenly observed the precarious balance of power in Sparta. He described the helots as living in a perpetual state of readiness for revolt, constantly scrutinizing Spartan misfortunes, such as earthquakes or military defeats, for any opportunity to rise up. His analytical precision extended to the legal mechanisms of control. For the ephors, he wrote, as soon as they enter into office, declare war against them, that they may kill them without incurring the guilt of blood. Aristotle's cold, factual recounting of this annual declaration highlights its strategic importance, not as a detail, but as a fundamental pillar of Spartan social order. It was a mechanism designed to relieve the Spartan state of any legal or religious culpability for the violence it perpetrated against its enslaved population, solidifying the Krypteia's place not as an aberration, but as calculated state policy. Beyond the seasonal horror of the Krypteia, the daily lives of helots were a continuous testament to this legalized dehumanization and systemic terror. Plutarch and other sources recorded numerous details illustrating their degraded existence. Helots were often forced to wear distinctive, humiliating clothing, typically coarse leather caps, cunei, or piles, or rough animal skins, which served as visible markers of their subservient status, preventing any mistaken identity with citizens. During public festivals and communal gatherings, particularly the gymnopaideia, helots were deliberately paraded in a state of forced intoxication. They were made to sing songs of humiliation, dance clumsily, and generally behave in a degraded manner, all for the amusement of young Spartans. This ritual served a dual purpose. It both publicly ridiculed the Helots, reinforcing their diminished status, and, perhaps more insidiously, taught the young Spartans a visceral lesson in the perils of drunkenness and uncontrolled behavior by presenting the Helots as cautionary examples. Arbitrary corporal punishment was also a pervasive feature of Helot life. They were frequently subjected to public floggings, not necessarily for any specific transgression, but simply as a reminder of their subjugation, their powerlessness, and their owner's absolute authority. These beatings served as a constant, painful reinforcement of their status, ensuring that the terror was not just an annual event, but an ever-present reality. Moreover, the Spartans maintained a vigilant watch for any Helot who might exhibit exceptional qualities. If a Helot became too physically impressive, too strong, too imposing, or demonstrated unusual intelligence, skill, or leadership capabilities, it was viewed with deep suspicion. Such individuals were considered a greater threat, a potential rallying point for future revolts. In these cases, the Helot's owner could be punished for failing to control their property, and the capable Helot themselves would simply disappear. Their fate was often an unrecorded death, a chilling echo of the 2,000 men who vanished after the promise of freedom. This practice underscores a central truth that sustained the entire Spartan edifice. Sparta was not merely a society of admirable warriors. It was, at its core, a totalitarian control machine, meticulously operating through a pervasive and ritualized system of violence. The Krypteia was the brutal yet essential training ground where adolescent Spartans internalized these lessons, learning that power required no justification, that violence was an effective tool, and that entire groups of people could be reduced to mere animals if the legal and religious structures validated such treatment. It was a world built on fear, maintained by cruelty, and justified by law. The brutal efficacy of the Krypteia, coupled with the daily regimen of humiliation and state-sanctioned violence, manifested in a chilling long-term legacy, a deeply entrenched climate of fear and subjugation that effectively paralyzed the vast Helot population for centuries. Despite their overwhelming numerical superiority, a ratio that could be as high as 10 Helots for every Spartan citizen, major Helot revolts were remarkably rare throughout Spartan history. The most significant, the Third Messenian War between 464 and 455 BCE, was sparked only by the chaos and devastation wrought by a catastrophic earthquake that decimated the Spartan citizenry. Even then, with Sparta literally in ruins and its infrastructure shattered, the Helots, though initially successful, could only sustain their rebellion for a few arduous years before being brutally crushed once more. This singular major uprising, far from disproving the Krypteia's effectiveness, actually served to underscore it. It demonstrated that only under the most extreme circumstances, when the Spartan state was at its weakest and most vulnerable, could a large-scale revolt even begin to materialize. For most of their history, the terror strategy worked almost perfectly. The Krypteia's insidious brilliance lay not just in the elimination of potential leaders, but in its profound psychological impact on the entire Helot community. By targeting strong, intelligent, and capable individuals, and by leaving their bodies as anonymous warnings, the Krypteia fostered an environment of pervasive mistrust. No Helot could fully trust another, for fear that any display of solidarity or shared grievance might draw the attention of the unseen predators. Leaving one's home alone after dark became a life-threatening gamble. Demonstrating intelligence, physical prowess, or even a nascent spark of leadership was tantamount to painting a target on one's own back. This system created an atomized society of victims, where communities were fractured by paranoia and individual initiative was systematically suppressed. The terror was not confined to a specific time or place. It was omnipresent and invisible, a spectral presence that permeated every aspect of Helot existence, transforming entire communities into a landscape of quiet, perpetual dread. The fear of disappearance, of being silently eliminated, became an internal censor, shaping behavior, stifling ambition, and extinguishing hope. For the young Spartans who participated in the Krypteia, their return to the city was not marked by public fanfare or open celebration. Spartan society, with its emphasis on austere discipline and a certain public stoicism, would not have openly lauded acts of clandestine murder. However, within the inner echelons of the Spartan elite, and certainly within the minds of the boys themselves, their passage through the Krypteia was internally understood as a crucial rite of passage. They had proven something fundamental to the maintenance of the Spartan social order. They were capable of committing the dirty work, the necessary acts that sustained their privileged position. They had demonstrated their ability to kill coldly, calculably, and without the heat of battle to rationalize their actions. This experience forged in them a profound psychological transformation. They had crossed a moral line, a boundary that irrevocably separated them from the ideals of civilized Hellenes that Sparta sometimes hypocritically claimed to embody. They emerged not just as warriors, but as instruments of terror, desensitized to the suffering of others and fully initiated into the brutal realities of Spartan power. They carried this brutal conditioning into their adult lives as full citizens, cementing the state's reliance on systematic violence. Sparta's unique and brutal system, however, was ultimately unsustainable. Its internal contradictions, particularly the severe demographic bottleneck caused by the agoge and the constant warfare, led to a steady decline in the number of full Spartan citizens. This dwindling population meant fewer men were available to maintain the rigorous system of control, defend the state, and, critically, to keep the vast Helot population in check. Eventually, the very foundation upon which Spartan power rested, its unique social and military structure, began to crack under its own weight. The long night of Helot subjugation finally ended when Thebes, under the brilliant leadership of Epaminondas, decisively defeated Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE. This catastrophic military defeat shattered Spartan dominance and paved the way for the liberation of Messenia in 369 BCE. After more than 3 centuries of ritualized terror and brutal enslavement, the Helots of Messenia finally regained their freedom and established their own independent state. Yet, the centuries of psychological warfare, of silent assassinations and public degradations left an indelible mark, not only on the former Helots, but also on the collective memory of human history. They emerged not just as warriors, but as instruments of terror, desensitized to the suffering of others and fully initiated into the brutal realities of Spartan power. They carried this brutal conditioning into their adult lives as full citizens, cementing the state's reliance on systematic violence. Sparta's unique and brutal system, however, was ultimately unsustainable. Its internal contradictions, particularly the severe demographic bottleneck caused by the agoge and the constant warfare, led to a steady decline in the number of full Spartan citizens. This dwindling population meant fewer men were available to maintain the rigorous system of control, defend the state, and, critically, to keep the vast Helot population in check. Eventually, the very foundation upon which Spartan power rested, its unique social and military structure, began to crack under its own weight. The long night of Helot subjugation finally ended when Thebes, under the brilliant leadership of Epaminondas, decisively defeated Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE. This catastrophic military defeat shattered Spartan dominance and paved the way for the liberation of Messenia in 369 BCE. After more than 3 centuries of ritualized terror and brutal enslavement, the Helots of Messenia finally regained their freedom and established their own independent state.
Yet, the centuries of psychological warfare, of silent assassinations and public degradations left an indelible mark not only on the former Helots, but also on the collective memory of human history.
The Krypteia, viewed through the lens of modern historical analysis, stands not as an isolated historical aberration, a peculiar custom unique to Sparta. Instead, it serves as a disturbing and deeply unsettling model, a blueprint for how societies built upon the brutal subjugation of a numerical majority consistently devise systems to train their elites in dehumanizing violence. Such societies invariably craft legal and religious mechanisms to absolve their enforcers, to sanitize their atrocities. They systematically select the most impressionable young individuals, molding them through ritualized experiences that normalize the unnameable, transforming them into willing participants in state-sponsored terror. When we look back at Sparta today, through the comfortable distance of millennia, there is an understandable, almost instinctive temptation to romanticize its discipline, its military courage, and the heroic sacrifice at Thermopylae. These qualities undoubtedly existed. But to truly understand Sparta, we cannot separate these celebrated attributes from the system that produced them. And at the dark heart of that system lay the Krypteia. In the moonless nights of ancient Peloponnese, when 14-year-old boys crouched in ravines waiting for an unarmed victim to pass, when blades met flesh in the darkness, and when bodies were left as chilling messages, this system had a clear, undeniable purpose. It was not primarily about creating honorable warriors. It was about forging a ruling class so brutalized, so utterly conditioned to remorse-free violence, that it could maintain thousands upon thousands of people in perpetual slavery through pure, calculated terror. For centuries, this system functioned with a terrifying efficiency, until, finally, it did not. But the scars, the indelible lessons of state-sponsored brutality and institutionalized dehumanization remained etched upon human history, a stark and timeless warning that humanity, even today, often refuses to fully heed. The Krypteia was worse than simple death, because it did not merely kill bodies, it extinguished hope, murdered potential, transformed adolescents into assassins, and created generations of victims living in constant psychological terror, all under the veneer of necessity, tradition, and even perverse virtue. The tale of Sparta, draped in the martial glory of Thermopylae and the relentless discipline of its warriors, ultimately resolves not in triumph, but in the slow erosion of its own brutal contradictions. The Krypteia, this chilling engine of systemic terror, maintained its grip for centuries, effectively suppressing the vast Helot population through fear and targeted elimination. Yet, the very system designed to preserve Sparta proved to be its undoing. The continuous siphoning of its citizen numbers into a rigid, violent apparatus, coupled with a demographic imbalance it could not sustain, led to a gradual, inexorable decline. For centuries, this system functioned with a terrifying efficiency, until, finally, it did not. But the scars, the indelible lessons of state-sponsored brutality and institutionalized dehumanization remained etched upon human history, a stark and timeless warning that humanity, even today, often refuses to fully heed. The Krypteia was worse than simple death, because it did not merely kill bodies, it extinguished hope, murdered potential, transformed adolescents into assassins, and created generations of victims living in constant psychological terror, all under the veneer of necessity, tradition, and even perverse virtue. The tale of Sparta, draped in the martial glory of Thermopylae and the relentless discipline of its warriors, ultimately resolves not in triumph, but in the slow erosion of its own brutal contradictions. The Krypteia, this chilling engine of systemic terror, maintained its grip for centuries, effectively suppressing the vast Helot population through fear and targeted elimination. Yet, the very system designed to preserve Sparta proved to be its undoing. The continuous siphoning of its citizen numbers into a rigid, violent apparatus, coupled with a demographic imbalance it could not sustain, led to a gradual, inexorable decline.
Messenia, the heartland of the Helots, eventually found its liberation in 369 BCE, unburdening itself from the yoke of Spartan oppression after generations of silent suffering. The era of the Krypteia, a period when teenage boys became executioners in the name of state security, drew to a close, leaving behind a legacy carved not in stone, but in the collective memory of human cruelty. What truly lingers from these ancient shadows is not merely the chronicle of a fallen empire, but a profound and unsettling reflection on the nature of unchecked power. The Krypteia stands as a stark testament to how fear, once meticulously cultivated and weaponized, can yield a harvest of terror, transforming even the most disciplined and ostensibly noble societies into architects of dehumanization. It compels us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the capacity for such organized brutality and the systematic normalization of the abhorrent lies dormant within any system that prioritizes control over justice and dominion over humanity. It is a timeless warning, an echo across millennia, about the deceptive allure of romanticizing tyranny and the profound, scarring price paid for order built upon the subjugation of others. As these echoes fade, we are left to ponder, what enduring lessons do you believe humanity has yet to fully grasp from the chilling shadows of Sparta's past? And what parallels, if any, do you see in the historical or contemporary world? Share your reflections in the comments below. If the untold histories that shape our world compel you to delve deeper into forgotten narratives and unsettling truths, consider exploring more of our compelling journeys. Ensure you never miss another excavation into the echoes of sin. Like this video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to Echoes of Sin for more explorations into the darker corners of history.